Imagine it is the summer of 1985. Just another hot, humid afternoon in Toronto, Ontario. You are 8 years old and can't wait to beat the heat by spending the day at a nearby pool close to your apartment building. Your friend is going to meet you at your apartment so you can spend the afternoon splashing around and having fun together. You put on your swimsuit, grab your favorite beach towel, slip on your shoes, and wait for your friend to buzz your apartment unit. When you hear the buzz through the intercom, you push the button to talk and tell your friend you are on your way downstairs. You leave your apartment. Your friend waits for you in the lobby, but you never arrive. Something happens to you, and only you know what it was. To this day, nobody has ever seen you again. You are Nicole Morin. Hello, squad, and welcome to this week's episode of Crime Squad. I hope you're all enjoying so far, and thank you so much to those of you who have listened. Today's episode features one of the cases that keeps me up at night. It's the disappearance of Nicole Morin. This episode, I'll talk about the events leading up to Nicole's disappearance and presumed abduction. We'll look at leads that have come through over the years, but ultimately, these would lead nowhere. Nicole is still missing. Okay, squad, let's get into it. Imagine a loved one just up and vanishes. One day, they're just gone without any rhyme or reason, and years go by without any closure in the case. Sadly, this experience happens more than many people think. It is absolutely devastating, and I cannot even imagine the pain families and friends experience when a loved one goes missing, especially a child. According to the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, approximately 45,000 children are reported missing each year in Canada. If that sounds high, in the United States, the number is staggering at 460,000 reported missing. I was unable to find reliable data on whether or not these children remain missing or are eventually found safe and sound. What I was able to find, however, were numerous websites listing missing persons cases that are still outstanding. I urge you, whenever you can, to spread the word and try to keep these stories alive so that one day the families that are impacted can hopefully find peace. Whenever I'm researching content for the podcast, I try to put myself in the shoes of the victims or family. I begin to wonder, if someone I loved went missing and was the victim of a violent crime, would I want law enforcement to find their remains? Would I want to know the details of their horrific end? Or would I want the case to remain unsolved to avoid the pain of knowing? What would you choose? Why? For me, the answer isn't so easy. I like to believe I am rooted in optimism. It's how I remain able to function in society knowing all the terrible things people do to each other. I research so many true crime stories and sift through missing persons cases, but I still smile at strangers and, for the most part, like to believe there is good in the world. If I never found out my loved one's fate, I could at least try to imagine that out there somewhere they were living a good life and nothing bad had happened to them. But of course, you can't really say how you'd act until you're in the situation. For me, there's something very unsettling about unsolved disappearance cases. It's traumatic enough to lose a loved one in a violent and unexpected manner. But what if one day at a certain time they just vanish? You're forever left wondering. This is what happened on July 30th, 1985 at around 11 a.m. in the morning. Nicole Morin, wearing her peach-colored bathing suit with an orange stripe, red canvas shoes, carrying a peach-colored towel and a plastic grocery shopping bag, was supposed to meet her friend in the apartment lobby to go swimming at the outdoor pool behind her apartment building. But she never arrived, and she has never been seen or heard from again. Let's just think about this for a second and talk about how baffling it is. How is it possible a little girl could go missing between leaving her penthouse apartment and going to the apartment lobby, and she's never found? A million questions rush through my head when I think about this. Was it a neighbor? Was she dragged into an apartment of someone in the building? Was she held there? But if the police searched, wouldn't she have been found? When was she removed from the building? There's so many unanswered questions, but the biggest, of course, is where is Nicole Morin? Nicole Louise Morin was born April 1st, 1977, to parents Jeanette and Art. At the age of 8, she was living at the West Mall, an apartment complex located in Etobicoke within the Greater Toronto Area. The pictures I found of her show a beautiful little girl with a twinkle in her eye. She has medium-length brown hair with straight-across bangs cut above her eyebrows. Her smile is wide and goofy. It is a very genuine smile. It plays not only across her lips, but you can see the joy in her eyes as well. She has an endearing gap between her front teeth. Her ears protrude slightly from her head. Her nose is small and button-like. She looks happy. Her picture would become well known in the Greater Toronto Area, her toothy grin plastered on missing persons posters as the search began. Nicole had a friend who lived in the same building, named Melissa Elaschuk. Now a detective constable with Toronto Police, Melissa has wonderful memories of Nicole. The girls were a year apart, with Nicole being the older one. Melissa fondly recalls that she and Nicole were, quote, the best of friends. They would see each other daily, usually when walking to school together. One of their favorite things to do was go swimming at the pool, the very same pool Nicole was headed to on the day she vanished. They did what little girls did. They would play together. In the 1980s, playing together meant being outside and letting your imagination run wild with all the adventures you would face. And like any fresh-faced young girl, Nicole was reported to have a cheerful personality. Her likes included fairs, the circus, and like many children growing up, including myself, trips to McDonald's. Her father referred to her as his treasure. The couple had been married 12 years before they had their daughter and didn't think they were going to have children. In fact, only 2 weeks prior to the day she went missing, Nicole and her mother watched a television program about missing children, which actually prompted Jeanette to educate Nicole to be wary of strangers, as well as how to call long distance if she ever needed to. So how did it all go so terribly wrong? Here is the chain of events. July 30th, 1985. Nicole's mother, Jeanette, became worried when Nicole still had not arrived home after a planned afternoon to swim with a friend. The series of events that followed included Jeanette organizing neighbors to search for Nicole around 3 that afternoon. By 6 p.m., the superintendent of the building called police. According to a 2010 article in the Toronto Star, quote, the subsequent police investigation is still considered one of the largest and most expensive ever conducted by the Toronto Police, end quote. Police set up roadblocks and police cruisers drove through the city using the vehicle PA systems to announce Nicole was missing, as well as provide a description of the little girl. The search was on. Of course, the apartment building was a significant point of interest, and a flurry of activity was occurring as police began to comb for clues. The media began appearing to start documenting the goings-on. Cal Miller, a former Toronto Star crime reporter, was on scene at the Morin apartment building, watching the search as it unfolded. By this time, based on suspicious and bizarre circumstances of Nicole's disappearance, the worst was feared: child abduction. Cal Miller had this to say about the investigation, quote, in the building, they went door to door, and if they didn't get an answer in the apartment, they went in anyway. There weren't concerns about we're violating people's rights or anything like that, end quote. As police tried to trace Nicole's last movements, they located a resident of the building who was likely the last person to see Nicole alive. According to an article in the Toronto Star written by the same Cal Miller and published March 23, 1986, a woman who lived on the seventh floor told police she and Nicole happened to be leaving the apartment at the same time that morning. When the woman got on the descending elevator on the seventh floor, Nicole was already there, having left her penthouse apartment. The woman said Nicole got off on the ground floor and walked into the lobby, whereas the woman continued the ride to the basement of the building, which was where the underground parking was. It was such a simple interaction that it would not have been given much thought. If I were the woman who saw her, there wouldn't have been any alarm bells going off for me. It seemed like an entirely natural and normal thing to be part of. Just two people going about plans for their day with no reason to be cautious or concerned. The thing is, though, this information meant Nicole did not suffer an attack in the elevator. Police were actually able to determine she had vanished at some point after leaving the elevator and walking toward the lobby. But the question remains, what happened to her just steps away from her waiting friend? How did nobody see anything? A bizarre turn in the case was the discovery of Nicole's diary, in which there was an entry that read, quote, "I am going to disappear," end quote. When I read that particular piece of information, I was covered in goosebumps. My heart started to pound a little faster and my throat became dry. Of course, it could be a coincidence. I haven't discounted that. I think back to various diaries I wrote as a child, and I'm sure some of those entries could be taken out of context if some ill fate were to have befallen me. But the fact that not only did Nicole disappear, but disappeared without a trace and has to date never been located, is enough to make that simple diary entry a very strange coincidence. The investigation would continue, and the lack of clues were certainly not for lack of trying. In addition to the citywide search, including PA systems with the police vehicles, there were helicopters deployed, marine units to search local ravines and bodies of water, canine units, and even mounted horsemen. There were reports that Nicole was seen near the outdoor pool around noon. However, this could not be substantiated as the lifeguard on duty reported that Nicole had actually not arrived at the pool that day. As the hours ticked by, dread overcame Jeanette Morin, who was quoted July 31st, 1985 as saying, quote, "I know someone's killed her. I can just feel it," end quote. And still, the search continued. The subsequent investigation cleared both Art and Jeanette Morin of any wrongdoing or involvement in the crime. 9 months after the search began, on March 23rd, 1986, the Toronto Star published an article written by the same crime reporter, Cal Miller, that the search was actually being called off. A special task force had been mobilized to aid in the investigation, but after 25,000 man-hours of investigating, which included interviewing around 5,000 people living near the vicinity of Nicole's disappearance, as well as following up on hundreds of tips received to the telephone hotline that they had set up, and the investigation of several hundred local sex offenders, there was nothing more to go on. The lack of evidence meant lack of work for the specialized team. The team had actually even utilized leads from psychics who claimed to be able to help locate Nicole. Obviously, all of this was fruitless. As the years wear on, the case remains open. Investigators who have been assigned the case over the last 35 years remain optimistic she will be found and urge people to come forward if they think they may have information on the case. No piece of information is deemed irrelevant. In October of 2013, Billy Joe Player came forward to do just that. Player, who was 11 years old at the time Nicole went missing, recalls a particularly unsettling incident that occurred only 2 days after Nicole was reported missing. She and her mother had been at their family barn located in a densely wooded area in a place called Springwater Township. Springwater Township is located near the town of Barrie in Ontario, about an hour's north of Nicole's residence in Etobicoke. Player says that day, she and her mother and nearby neighbors heard horrific screams that sounded, quote, like a little girl screaming for her life, basically, unquote. They were so unsettled that they ran home and her mother immediately called 911. Reportedly, the Ontario Provincial Police investigated, but nothing was found. Years later, Player said she saw a photo of Nicole. I would assume probably in the media, with all the renewed interest in her case over the years, which actually prompted Player to approach the police again. An officer interviewed her, and a year later, in October of 2014, police showed up in Springwater Township and began to investigate again. 40 officers combed the area, but unfortunately, no new leads were found. Although the tip didn't yield anything, Player came forward to the media in the hopes of showing others their tips are taken seriously. If you know something, say something. You never know if your tip is the missing link in the puzzle. Over the years, Nicole's father, Art Morin, has remained optimistic. This may seem absurd to many people, but I get it. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm rooted in optimism, and if I never had the closure, I would want to assume the best over the worst. Okay, so here's a quick recap of what we know so far. July 30th, 1985, Nicole vanishes without a trace. Despite numerous searches, countless man hours, and a specialized task force, the case went and still remains cold. Art Morin, Nicole's father, has hired private investigators over the years, all of which came up empty handed. In 2014, a social media campaign called #FindNicole was launched by the Toronto Police Service to renew interest in the case. Now, interestingly, the social media campaign marked 29 years since Nicole's disappearance. Police hoped revisiting the case would prompt someone who knows something to come forward. They actually filmed a video reenactment of the day Nicole went missing, which you can find on the internet. Age progression photos of what Nicole might look like over the years have been created, and I'll actually post these on my Instagram, which you can follow at Crime Squad Pod. Nicole's mother, Jeanette, unfortunately passed away in 2007 without closure. She tried to remain optimistic, and her faith in humanity didn't waver. In 1986, she was quoted by our friend Cal Miller in the Toronto Sun as saying, quote, "I know there's someone out there that can help us. Someone knows something. I'm convinced of it. If only that person will come forward." Most recently, the case received new interest in July of 2022. Please Bring Me Home Canada is a Canada-wide volunteer organization that focuses on investigating missing persons in cold cases. They act on tips that come in from the general public. One of these tips led the team to a park in Toronto's West End, which has not been publicly identified. According to the website toronto.com, the team investigated over a period of several hours based on what they considered to be a solid tip from a member of the public who claimed she saw Nicole with a man the morning of her disappearance, walking into the park. The organizers at Please Bring Me Home felt that the tip was viable, and to aid with the search, cadaver dogs were used to try and track the scent of human remains. And they got a hit. Now, obviously, the dogs weren't able to search for Nicole specifically. They're only trained to locate the smell of human remains, but that's not necessarily specific to a particular person. The only information I have to date is the dogs identified an area that could contain human remains, but the area was difficult to access because of the dense foliage. It's also been rumored over the years that this case is similar to one that happened a year prior to Nicole, which was in October of 1985. The murder of Christine Jessup led investigators to her killer, but it took 40 years to identify him. It was in 2020 this cold case was finally solved, and police announced that a man named Calvin Hoover was responsible for the sexual assault and murder of Christine Jessup. Unfortunately, Hoover took his own life in 2015, so he cannot be brought to justice. Police actually now believe Hoover could be linked to Nicole's disappearance, and this is going to remain a hot topic of active investigation. I'm hopeful Nicole's case will be solved so Art can finally get the closure he deserves, as he is still living. I wish I had more that I could report on with this one, but it really is a case of poof, gone. And there was just so little to go on that there isn't much to be able to report on. I do thank you, though, for listening. I hope that you took this case in, and that, maybe you'll share with people and get talking. And again, you can look at the reenactment video by going online, and if you just pop into a search engine, Nicole Morin, I'm sure it will come up. So that's going to do it. Thanks so much again for listening. And remember, stay safe and be kind to each other. Thanks so much.